Welcome to the show. My name is Sierra Cooke. I am a certified doula, a mom of 4, and I am here to teach you everything you need to know about achieving a pain-free childbirth from a Christian perspective. So in this first episode, I'm going to tell you my birth story so you can see where I am coming from and why I am so passionate about helping you achieve the pain-free birth that you desire. And so I want you to know that it's absolutely possible for you. So starting with telling my story so that you can see that I went from very traumatic births and painful births to achieving a pain-free birth, and that same exact thing can happen for you too. So my first birth was back in 2014, and so I'll go ahead and start by telling you just what the pregnancy was like. So that pregnancy was within my first marriage. I was with a drug addict. I got married at 19 years old just because I was pregnant. So that was a very messy situation. But so, focusing specifically on pregnancy and childbirth part of that, the pregnancy was extremely stressful because I was always going back and forth with my ex-husband, and I did not do very much to prepare for birth at all. I just listened to everyone around me and believed, like the movies, like, oh, it's going to be painful and I can get an epidural and everything will be fine and I won't have to, do anything except show up for the birth, and they'll give me an epidural and everything will be great. And so that's kind of my mindset around it at the time. I was naive about it. I didn't look into it. I may have read a book or two about how to take care of a newborn, but as far as advocating for myself, having any kind of experience that I actually would have desired, didn't do any of that. So the day of my daughter's birth, her name is Briley, the doctors had told me, well, first of all, let me go back to nausea. I had a bunch of nausea all throughout pregnancy, all day long, every day. I had to go to the hospital to get fluids at one point, and it was just, not an easy pregnancy. I wouldn't have called it. And so the day of, the doctors had already decided to induce me, and that was due to the chance of a big baby. So of course I just listened to that, and I was like, oh, I don't want to cause any problems. I trust your judgment here. So this was around Thanksgiving. Let's keep that in mind. She was born November, at the beginning of November, and so of course you've got all the holidays coming up. So they let me pick the day that I wanted to have my baby, and so we went in at like 8 a.m., got Pitocin to start contractions, all of those things happening. They broke my water shortly after that to try to speed things up, and so all day long I was there, not too much pain other than when they checked for dilation and whenever they broke my water. Those two things were painful at the time. And then so when I started to feel some pain with contractions when they were picking up, that's when I asked for the epidural. I didn't really feel that much. So I got the epidural, everything was numb, and they started doing the coached pushing around 8 p.m. So it had been about 12 hours since that first, dose of Pitocin in the morning. So, coached pushing, in case you don't know, is where the doctor is basically watching your contractions on the screen, and then based on that, they count down from, I think it's 10, and will basically tell you to push that entire time and to force. And it's very forceful, and you're straining the entire time. It feels completely unnatural. And to make matters worse, which wasn't the doctor's, doing at this point, I still had that, drug addict husband who showed up for the birth, and he was the entire time, I guess he was on drugs, I don't really know. He had drank like 5 Red Bulls. He was extremely nervous through this entire process, and he was talking the entire time I was pushing. So I had my mom at my side, and he was on the other side, and his sister was there. And he was telling his sister this story about how he ran over a snake in front of her house, like this just crazy scenario, and I was just ignoring all of that, thinking I'm having a baby, and I just ignored it. I didn't get angry, I just ignored it. But I wish I would have had an advocate there, like a doula, someone who would have been like, shut up and go away. And who would have even asked me, like, do you want me to tell him to leave? Anyways, so I pushed for an entire hour with the forced coached pushing. And during that time, the doctor said that I was most likely going to tear, so she was going to go ahead and cut an episiotomy. I didn't know what that was really. I just trusted the doctor. So I said, okay, sure. Well, she cut the episiotomy, and I still tore from all the forceful pushing. It wasn't from a big baby because my baby was only 8 pounds, so it wasn't, 9, 10, 11. And even those size babies can come out without any issues. But I trusted her, so I allowed her to cut the episiotomy, and then I tore. So I had a tear from front to back. There was nothing that they didn't have to sew up. So baby comes out, and they, of course, I didn't advocate for skin to skin, anything like that. So they immediately take her over, clean her off, and throughout that time, they started to do stitches because I hemorrhaged. So I had hemorrhaging going on at that time. I wasn't holding my baby. They didn't offer for me to hold my baby, as far as I can remember. And so she was over there, and I have a photo of myself where I was just looking over there while they were doing the stitches. So that wasn't a very great experience, but I didn't know anything different. So because of the tearing and the episiotomy, I had an extremely difficult time with healing. So every time I would, use the bathroom, it was extremely painful. It would burn, and then, walking around, doing anything like that was very difficult because of gravity pulling that area, and I had all of that, trauma to that area. And so I would not rate my postpartum experience as a good experience, on top of, my marital issues at the time. So, but as far as healing, it took me several weeks to heal physically, and then I was okay. And I was only, at that time, 20 years old. And so, I had my younger age on my side at that time. So let's skip forward to my second birth. So I'm still with my first husband, and with this pregnancy, it was kind of a shock and kind of a, oh no, I'm pregnant. This is not good. I'm with someone who I found out I was pregnant with her while he was in rehab for drugs. And I just felt like there's no way I can bring this baby into this. I actually started looking into adoption, but he was like, no, I'll take the baby from you. We're not going to put her up for adoption. So it was a very scary, terrible time in my life. And the way I found out that I was pregnant was I just started having all this sickness. And then I shamefully asked my aunt at the time, I was staying at her house because he was in rehab, to go get a pregnancy test because I just felt like I needed to take one. And then, of course, I found that I was pregnant with her. So, I love each of my children the same, even though they have different fathers and very, very different situations. So I loved her from the beginning. It's just I was thinking through, I cannot bring her into this. What am I going to do? And so the pregnancy side to that was kind of my mental situation. And the pregnancy side of that was I was very sick again all day long, every day for most of the pregnancy. Had to receive, IV fluids, things like that. And I did a little bit more research during that time. So I started to realize I don't, want to have that same experience that I had the first time. So what options do I have? No one around me, movies, the people around me didn't have any advice on other options other than going to the hospital and just letting them do whatever. And so I started digging into that on my own. I spent a lot of time reading books, a lot of time, I found a doula who could kind of, talk to me through these things. Once I decided I'm going to go for a natural birth, I had no idea what I was doing. And I remember even I saw a message between two of my family members that said something like, she's so naive, how she has no idea what she's getting herself into with the natural birth. And so it kind of hurt my feelings. I was like, man, these people aren't gonna be supportive in this. And so I didn't have anybody to support me really, and that's when I hired a doula who I knew would believe that I could do a natural birth and that it would be okay to go to a birthing center. Like my own mom was like, this is not safe, you had hemorrhaging, you don't need to go to a birth center, you need to be at a hospital, all these things. And so, but I wanted to believe for something different. I was like, no, I know that I can do something different. I don't want that experience. And so I started to dive into all these, holistic living type of things to try to help my pregnancy, to try to help the baby be the healthiest possible for birth, for a natural birth. And that's what I did. So I spent all that time of pregnancy taking care of my other child and digging into that natural birth and natural lifestyle, healthy living overall. And so I changed a lot of things. So let's skip to the day of birth. So I had prepared for birth through hiring a doula, all of these things. And I found a birth center that was near me where I was going to have the baby at. And so the night before I gave birth, I was having contractions and I didn't really know what to expect because I had, the hospital birth with epidural and all those things. So I didn't even know what to expect for labor. So I was having contractions and timing those, and that's kind of how I knew I was in labor. And it was a very stressful time. It probably would have been shorter, but let's say like 8 p.m. the night before, I was having all these contractions. Well, ended up in an argument with my husband. I slept on the couch with our older daughter, and he slept in our bed. And so it was just not a happy time at all, like, excited for this birth. So I decided to just focus on that and to try to get rest. So that morning when I woke up, I called my mom immediately to come get me, and he was supposed to take our older daughter to my grandmother's house. And I knew I was in labor because when I called my doula to be like, I'm pretty sure I'm in labor, I'm pretty sure I need to go to the birth center, because the plan was not to go until there was only like a few hours before the actual birth. So, she could tell on the phone that I was having to stop and breathe through contractions, and so that's how she determined, like, yes, you need to go, and how much time was in between those. So my mom took me to the birth center, and once I was there, I had tested positive for group B strep a few weeks before, which I wish I had gotten a test, closer to the birth to make sure that I needed this intervention, because I didn't want any interventions really. And so they had to put an IV as soon as I got there and give me penicillin for the group B strep, which is fine, but they couldn't, I was already in, having pain in my contractions, and so it was making it hard. Like, I was already in this defense stress mode because of what had happened between my husband and I the night before, and then feeling pain and just being scared. And so they were having a hard time finding like the vein for my IV to put the antibiotics in. And so they were having to dig around, and it was just a very stressful time. So once I actually put the penicillin in, which I guess I've never received before, I felt like I couldn't breathe. And so I'm trying to breathe through contractions, felt like I couldn't breathe. And so they administered Benadryl, and that was, if I was having an allergic reaction, I wasn't sure. We weren't sure if I was having an allergic reaction or just like a panic attack because of them like digging around and me just in so much stress. So they administered that, and then I was okay with breathing after that. I also had asthma. And so I started laboring in the tub, which is where I wanted to have the baby, and because I knew it helped with tearing, and I didn't want that same experience of tearing as I had the first time. So I was laboring in the tub, and the water and the temperature, it did help some with pain, but I was in extreme pain. Like, I was having to breathe very deeply into it. My husband, who was supposed to come drop our daughter off and then come straight to the birthing center, was nowhere to be found. So that was also an issue. And I was just trying to focus on, like, how do I get through this? The doula got there by that time, and she was trying to coach me through some things, but it was extremely painful. And so I felt like I had to go to the bathroom. I got up, went to the bathroom, and then I felt like the baby was coming out. Like, I needed to push. I felt the urge. So I didn't want to get back in the water, and I was like, just take me to the bed. I'm freaking out at that time a little bit. And I get on the bed, and I'm on my back trying to push. And I hadn't really learned anything about being in different positions, but at some point the midwife checked and was saying like the baby's heart rate was dropping, so I needed to get this baby out. And that had been about after like 20 to 30 minutes of me pushing. This was forced pushing. Like, I felt the urge to push, but it was still like, I don't know what to do. I don't know what my body's doing. I felt uneducated about it, and I was just forcing the pushing. And so it was extreme pain, of course. So she said, you have to get this baby out. I'm going to have to cut an episiotomy if you can't get her out. And so the doula said to get on your knees and let gravity help. So I did that. She still wasn't coming out immediately. So the midwife decided to break my water to help her come out. So as soon as she did that, it was extremely painful. I started screaming, and it just felt like, I mean, I could feel just everything tearing is what it felt like. And so not long after that, she came out, and it was just so much pain that I couldn't even hold her. I hemorrhaged again and was very close to having to be transferred to a hospital for blood, but thank God I didn't have to do that. And so I couldn't even hold her because it was so much pain down there from tearing and from forcing her out. And so she also came out with her hand like up on the side of her head, so that didn't help either. But so the healing for that was a little bit better, and I think it was because I didn't, have the episiotomy, but it was still just a very stressful time, and it wasn't a happy time. But I did consider that birth better than my first birth, even though I had no idea how much better it could actually be. So that daughter was named Krista, and she actually did end up passing away when she was 3 months old. She was left alone with my now ex-husband, and she suffered shaken baby syndrome. And so she coded after that. She was extremely severely disabled, and she lived for 3 years. And then, unfortunately, she passed away from those initial injuries. And so, it's a sad story to all of that, but I do think that God kind of led me to having that birth, because if I hadn't had a natural birth with her, like, it made me feel more connected to her, and it made me feel like, I went through all of this, toiling and sweating over her for her entire life after what happened to her. And it just, just gave me this feeling of I would do anything for her, and including that if I had to go through that birth again, I would much rather not have to, but if I had to, I would absolutely do that for her again. But I always, even since the moment I was pregnant with her, always did everything I could to give her the best life. And so I'm just thankful that I did all of that. Okay, so I got married. I divorced him, of course, after that happened. And so then I got remarried. And our first pregnancy together was really bad. I was extremely nauseous 24/7. I couldn't do anything. He had to take over being a caregiver for my daughter Krista. She hadn't passed away yet. And he had to take care of our older daughter, my older daughter, Briley, and he had to do everything. And so he was also trying to provide for us. It was a very difficult time, especially newly married. And we did end up finding out that I miscarried that baby. So at 11 weeks, we had one ultrasound, and then at 11 weeks, for whatever reason, I decided I was going to have this baby at the hospital. So I went to the hospital, I got an ultrasound, and then one day I was sleeping, and I woke up to some brown mucusy stuff in my underwear on the bed. And my mom just happened to be at my house, I think. And so I had her take me to the ER because I knew that wasn't normal. I've never experienced that before. So the doctor came in and did tell us that the baby had no heartbeat. And so that was just a devastating thing to go through. But we had a third baby. So Kaya is my third birth, and that's with my current husband, Canyon. And so pregnancy was, again, I was extremely sick, extremely, low energy, and I had to have my mother-in-law take care of, that was with Eden. So I had to have help from my husband Canyon to take care of Briley again because I was so sick, couldn't really do anything. I had to end up going to get fluids, all the same thing that I experienced with pregnancies before. But this time I was like, I still want to have a natural birth. I was considering getting an epidural, thinking this natural birth thing is just not going to work for me this time. I don't want to go through all this pain and suffering. So I was considering it, but then I was like, So I thought, well, maybe if I get a midwife at the hospital, that will help a little bit, because there was no birthing centers. It seemed like there was no option. We were living with his parents at the time. It seemed like there was no option of a good home birth, which is what I had actually desired. So we were going to the hospital to see a midwife. And fast forward to the actual birth, it was around 9 p.m. whenever I started feeling contractions. So it was a tightening. I felt a little bit of pain with them. So I was like, let's take a nap, because we had went through some trainings and read some books about husband-led birth. So we were like, okay, this is great. Kenyon can be basically my support person, and he's going to take it all over, and he's going to remind me to get in certain positions and things like that. That was how I was going to cope with the pain this time, was having him to tell me what positions to get into, to relax as much as possible, to have the lights down low, all these things we were planning for the hospital. And the hospital did have a tub that you could get in, but they were like, you cannot give birth in the tub. Okay, I don't understand these policies, but that was the policy. So that was the preparation we did for this birth. And when we left, so 9 p.m., I was having contractions. I was like, let's take a nap, because the training we had received from these books and stuff and courses was wait until you're towards like active labor to go to the hospital. Labor at home for as long as you possibly can. So that's what we thought we were doing. And we woke up around 11 o'clock and I could really feel the contractions, and I was like, we better go, because I'm starting to feel these things now. So we got to the hospital and got to the room, and that's when, the nurse was like, oh, I'm going to check you for dilation. And I hadn't been checked. I think I might have gotten checked once, because I didn't want dilation checks. So I didn't go to the doctor getting checked every, few times before the actual birth, which is what kind of like the basic thing you do when you're seeing a doctor in pregnancy. So when we got there, she said, I'm going to check you for dilation, and depending on that, we'll either keep you or send you home. And I was like, okay. It was a little annoying to me, because I was like, I told my husband, I'm in labor and I'm staying here, so I don't care what this dilation check says. So she checked me, and I think I was 4 centimeters dilated. So like, okay, well, we'll check you. We'll come back in an hour or 2 hours and see where you're at, and that will determine if we send you home. So still, I was like annoyed about that. But I was like, okay, I've got to speed this up now, because no one wants to stay in labor anyways, but I was like, I don't want to get sent home, so I've got to speed this up. So I started to walk around and use the birth ball and stuff like that to try to get the baby to move down and to dilate. So she comes back, and I was then a 6, so I had dilated 2 centimeters. And so they were like, okay, we'll keep you. You're definitely in labor. So it's like, well, I want the tub. They didn't have a tub set up or anything. This was a small hospital. And you already knew that they weren't really prepared for natural births, and that they didn't have very many of those. So they said that they were going to call the midwife who was on call and would come in, based on that. So the midwife never shows up, but so they get this tub, they put it together, and then they say that they're going to have to start putting buckets of water from the sink into this tub. I was like, it's going to take forever. I'm already in pain, and I'm just annoyed again. And then of course they're getting all my insurance information. They're asking me all these millions of questions that they've already asked me, at my doctor's appointments. And I'm just trying my best to stay calm and not be annoyed. But I'm like, you've already asked me these questions. I was in pain and I was annoyed. So I get into the shower to try to relieve some of the pain with the hot water while I waited on this tub. So my mother-in-law is filling up the tub. My husband's trying to go back and forth to check on me. And the shower did help. So I get in the tub, and the contractions start coming stronger and stronger. And, the nurse is coming in and out talking a lot. I had to ask her to be quiet and for people not to come in unless they absolutely had to. And so I'm trying to keep the lights down low. I'm trying to set the environment for myself, even when I'm going through this pain, to keep it to the way I actually desired it to be, which most of it was nothing like I desired. But so contractions are coming and I'm in the tub, and by this time it's like 1, 2, 3 o'clock. I'm still going through all of this for hours and hours, and it was painful. And so I get out to use the bathroom, and I knew that I was feeling the urge to push again. And so around 6 a.m., I get onto the bed on my hands and knees, because that's what I did last time, and that's what I knew kind of worked. And so I was in a very uncomfortable position where I had like my chin to my chest and my hands on my knees, and was trying to start pushing her out, forcing her out. I had never heard of anything like allowing your body to push your baby out. Like, that wasn't part of that training. Like, I know that it may have mentioned that a little bit, but I didn't realize that was possible, and I didn't wait. As soon as I started feeling these really strong contractions, and they were watching them on the monitor, and they were saying, yeah, you could push right now. You can go ahead and push. You're having a big contraction. And so it was kind of like this forced coached labor again, although I was more in control because I could feel things. And so I was pushing her out. I was just trying to shove her out. It was extremely painful. It was exhausting. And nobody mentioned anything about getting in a better position until finally the nurse was like, hey, we could raise the head of the bed so you could at least lean over on the bed. And I was like, great, that sounds awesome. So I did that, and that was better than trying to just sit here with my hands on my knees and hold my head up by my chest. Like, it was just so uncomfortable. But when I started to do that, the baby was coming down, so I could feel her coming like through the birth canal, getting closer, because I felt a lot more pressure. My water broke, and then as I was pushing, the nurse was like, you need to squat into it. And so I tried to squat into it, and that's when I realized the doctor had his fingers in me and was forcefully pushing around the sides, like the walls of my vagina. And I yelled, stop. I can't. He's got his fingers in me. Get your fingers out of me. Stop. And so I started yelling that, and I'm in such pain, and I'm in a position where I felt like I could not move because she was coming down and out. And so his only response was, gosh, what did he say? No, I forgot. Oh, it's helping the baby come out. That was it. I told him to stop. I said it several times, and that was his response. And so my husband, this was his first birth he's ever been at, and he was standing at the head, rubbing my shoulders, just trying to comfort me. But he also wasn't in a position to be, he's in such emotional distress as well, and watching me, that he wasn't in a position to advocate for me. I wish I had had a doula. That would have been great. But also I was supposed to have the midwife there, and she wasn't there. So it was this random doctor. And so anyways, so that caused me some issues. I could not squat into a position that I wanted to be in. So anyways, and I could hear them talking and saying, look, you can see so-and-so. They usually can't see that because it's without the natural birth. You can't see certain things, I guess. And so I hated every minute of it except seeing her. So she comes out finally, and they lay her on my chest, and I could tell that, she wasn't really crying much, and she was a little bit purple. So I was rubbing her, trying to get her to, respond. She was crying just a little. And so that's when they took her over and said that her oxygen was low and that they needed to put her immediately on oxygen. So they have her over there. They're trying to get her, oxygen back up. They have, they put oxygen over her face and things like that. And, again, I wanted the delayed cord clamping. I wanted them to do all those things that I had requested, and was denied all of those. So they immediately cut her cord, rushed her over there, didn't have any skin to skin, and they could have done those things. Like, all they did was put oxygen on her. They didn't resuscitate her or anything, but they put oxygen on her. That could have happened on my chest. Now that I look back and see these things that I wish I would have advocated for. But instead, they say they need to take her out to observe her. So I'm over here hemorrhaging again. Blood is pouring off of the table, off of the bed, and onto the floor, and it was just a disaster. And so I'm over here hemorrhaging, and they still haven't even attended to me because the doctor's over looking at the baby, along with 10 nurses. So they take the baby. They say they're taking the baby to observe her in the nursery. I was like, no, you are not taking her without one of us there. And I'm over here dizzy because I'm losing so much blood. I can barely see anything because the room is spinning so much, and I'm in such pain. And I say, can you go with her, my husband? So he went with her. My mother-in-law was with me. So I'm laying there. They finally start to stitch me up, and it was an hour before they came back with her, and she was completely fine. And so that was also not a good experience. I had to wait an entire hour. I was just literally sitting there staring at the wall. Like, I was so upset at the entire situation. I felt just completely down and depressed. And I didn't get to breastfeed her. That was my plan until she finally got back. And it was just such a disappointing time, even though we thought we had prepared well. So moving on to the fourth birth. And I'm trying to make this as quick as possible without, dragging it out. So pregnancy with my fourth birth, with Eden is her name, was again awful, with sickness and vomiting and having to go to the hospital for fluids and dehydration. And my mother-in-law had to take care of my older daughter Briley and Kaya for a lot of that time. Thank goodness she was able to, because I was so sick and miserable most of the first trimester of pregnancy. I didn't know that there was anything else available to me. I didn't read anything yet about how the kingdom of God works, how God can change that. And I didn't believe, I just didn't know what I didn't know. And so for that pregnancy, it was the same. And then how did we prepare for birth? Well, around, I think, 5 or 6 months, I came across a pain-free birth book and information. And I started digging into everything. I was like, you know what? I've tried it all. And this was through God, not some, praying to false gods or, whatever. It wasn't relying on yourself anymore. It wasn't hypnosis. It wasn't all these things. It was all about, you can achieve a pain-free birth through Jesus, through, what he has done for us. And I was like, I'm on board with this. I've never tried it. I've had 3 traumatic, awful births, and I'm willing to do anything. And so, I had seen things about pain-free birth in the past, and I was like, oh, this is a bunch of bull. This is dumb. But I had asked a mom on Instagram who has like 10 kids, how do you keep having kids when you have this and this and this going on? And I was like, I'm nauseous. I want to have more kids, but I have so much nausea during pregnancy that I don't think I could ever have any more kids. And so she recommended this book, which was about pain-free birth, but it also went into pain-free, supernatural, through the Lord, nausea-free pregnancy as well. It doesn't have to just apply to the birth. So I was like, I'll read this. I'll do whatever. So I came into this completely new understanding and hope that, oh my goodness, I can have a pain-free birth. What? And it's through God and his strength and his abilities, so that all the pressure is off of me now to try to force this. And so it was a whole new thought process, a whole new perspective. I had to renew my mind constantly, over and over and over, and tell myself, yes, I've had a traumatic birth, and that's the only experience I've ever had, but it doesn't have to be that way this time. And so I spent months renewing my mind to this, and almost all I did, other than taking care of my kids, was reading this over and over again, finding all the information I could, finding everything in the Bible that talks about it, and praying and renewing my mind to it constantly. And so in my 4th birth, I was like, I have got to find a midwife. I'm having this baby here. And at the time, we lived in our camper, and we were kind of traveling around. And so we started out in Florida. We ended up staying in Asheville, North Carolina for the birth. And I was like, I'm going to find a midwife, even though it was like 2 months away from the birth. And God's going to help me find this midwife. And she's going to help me have this home birth that I've always desired. And I'm not going to have any pain. And my daughter's name was Eden. And so I even started saying Eden Pain Freedom when I would pray for her and pray over the birth and all of these things. So I'm going to try and make this quick too. I found the midwife. God sent me the midwife just 2 months before, 2, maybe 3 months before the birth. And we planned on having a water birth there in our camper, which is not a huge camper. But so she had 2 attendants who were like learning to become midwives, who were going to attend the birth too. So the day comes, and all this time I'm preparing my mind and everything for this pain-free birth. So I knew that I may not know I'm in labor if it's pain-free and I'm not, feeling any pain. And that's how it indicated in the past that I was in labor. So I was timing contractions because I started feeling them very constantly. I was like, okay, this is kind of different, so I'm going to start timing them. Well, I realized they were coming, 5 minutes apart and all of those things. I started keeping track. And so I told my husband to come home from work at the time, and we started preparing for this. This was around like 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock in the evening. And we decided to wait to have the midwife come. I didn't want 3 people in our small camper just kind of staring at us. And so I was like, I'm going to wait to have her come. So I had my mom go ahead and come because she was driving like 2.5 hours to help watch the kids in case they were to wake up. And again, we're in this small camper. It was our bedroom, the kitchen, which is where the tub was going to be set up at, and then their bedroom and a bathroom. So they were all right there packed in. And my older daughter was 8 years old at the time, and we had explained to her what was going to happen and that she could be there if she wanted to. So I also had this kind of like pressure on me that if this is not a pain-free good experience, she's going to see that and she's not going to want to have kids. But I just trusted God that it was going to be wonderful. And so I started having those contractions that I could only tell by a little bit of pressure and timing them. So we decided, let's go to sleep and take a nap, and maybe it'll help progress things. So around midnight, I was asleep and thought I heard this really loud popping sound. And when I woke up, I realized that my mucus plug had come out. And in the past, that had happened right before, I started like into the active labor stages. And I was like, oh, I'm in labor. So for a moment, I really started to freak out. Like, I'm having a baby in my camper. I don't have the midwife here. She's 2 hours away. And I'm really starting to freak out. So I started shaking uncontrollably and just freaking out. So I called the midwife and I was like, you need to come here right now. So that's when my husband said he knew I was in actual labor. But again, I was not feeling pain. It was just like my mind was starting to go a little bit wild. So before we had went to sleep around 7, 8, 9 o'clock, we had set up the tub and the water was not warming up. Like in our camper, we didn't have a huge water tank for like hot water. And so we had bought something that was supposed to heat that water up, and it wasn't heating up. So I was like, you know what? If I'm not meant to have a water birth, it'll be fine. And I'll just trust God with this too. So by the time we had woke up after I had my mucus plug come out, the water was warm again, or it was warm. And so I was like, that was a little bit of stress off my shoulders, but I knew that I had to zone in and get through this little freak out that I was having. And then I told myself, I don't partner with this fear, I partner with God. This is fear, this is not God, and I rebuke this. And so I got myself calmed down. And just a little side note here, everybody worries about like pooping during labor, and I had even been asking God, please God, make a way for me to be able to do that in the toilet, to not have it happen in the tub where we have to drain the water, all these things. I was a little bit concerned. So right as I stepped into the water, I felt like I have got to go. So my mom held something up to catch everything, and it all came out right there, and I didn't have to deal with it in the water. We threw all that stuff away, and it was good. And so that was just a little, side note of like asking God for all the little details, including that. So I got in the tub, and everything was going really well. Every once in a while I would get this feeling of fear come over me just because of the situation. The midwife wasn't there yet. I knew she was still an hour and a half away, and I would rebuke that fear. And so there came a time where I started, so my mom and my husband were sitting there in the living room with me, and I had not given them any instructions. I was silent. The only time I would make a sound is if I was singing and if I rebuked any kind of fear. And so I started feeling this very intense pressure, and it wasn't pain, but it was very intense pressure, and it was different than anything I had felt up to that point. So I started to get scared. And then I started to feel just a tiny little amount of pain. And I was like, no. I rebuke this fear. I rebuke this pain. This is not happening. This is not how this is going to happen. And so then I didn't feel anything else. But I did feel this intense pressure. So all of a sudden, I get up on my knees and I said, someone catch her. I didn't even realize that I was about to push this baby out. I didn't even realize she was there to come out because I didn't feel anything. And apparently my water had broken at some point in the water, and I just didn't feel that either. And so they're shocked. The assistant had just walked in the door, a few minutes before that, and said, someone catch her. And that's literally all I said. And my husband always goes back like, I cannot believe that happened. So I realized she was between my legs just because of the pressure, not pain. And so I do regret this part. I just started pushing. I wish I would have just let it happen, because I may not have tore any if I had just let it happen compared to pushing. I freaked out a little bit thinking the baby's right here, and pushed. So I gave one push, maybe two pushes, and she was out. And it was amazing. It was wonderful. And I was just in such shock. Like, I started praising God. Thank you, Jesus. I can't believe He did this. Like, thank you, thank you, thank you. And that's all I could do is say that. And so we were holding her. Everything was great. I did not hemorrhage. And I did tear some. I do believe it was because of that pushing that I did. But I did tear a little bit and had to get stitches. So we moved into the bedroom for me to start getting like stitched up and stuff a little bit after holding her and spending time with her. And I was breastfeeding her. And so she had no issues at all. And the only issue I had was that I had to get stitches. So that was a little bit painful because I had to get like the numbing, and I could feel a little bit of that. And so that was the painful part. So as far as healing, the postpartum period was pretty good, especially compared to the other ones. There are things that I would have changed. I did give into fear some because I have migraines, and so I did have 1 or 2 migraines during that time, and it was a very stressful time. I felt a lot of fear around having a migraine, trying to take care of a baby. And this, next time around, I'm going to rebuke that as well and not give into that fear and stay in faith in that. But overall, a completely different experience, a wonderful experience. And so I'm actually experiencing my 5th pregnancy now. And so I have applied this to pregnancy. And I am amazed because I told you how I was diagnosed with hyperemesis, vomiting all the time, causing dehydration and hospitalization, having to go get fluids. And this pregnancy, I have not experienced that. I have thrown up one time, and that was after driving 8 hours in the car. And I have had some nausea, which I've learned to rebuke, and things like that. So this has been a completely different pregnancy so far. I can't wait to see how the birth is, but this applies to pregnancy as well. And I'm going to teach you how to do these things. So this is why I'm here. If this is your first birth, I don't want you to have to go through any of those struggles that I had to go through. You don't have to. And if you've already had a difficult, a painful, or traumatic birth, just know that this time does not have to be that way, or the next time that you're pregnant. It doesn't have to be the same. And I want you to leave this episode and the future episodes, feeling and truly believing that it doesn't have to be that way anymore, that you can have the birth you desire, and it can be pain-free. And Mark 9:23 tells us that everything is possible for him who believes. And so receive that and believe that about your birth, about your pregnancy, that everything is possible for him who believes. And, speak that over yourself too. That's something you can write down and speak every single day. Everything is possible for him who believes. Mark 9:23. And so I am going to believe that with you. I'm going to use my experience in doula training to guide you. And, this podcast is here to give you spiritual guidance. It's here to give you, we'll get into what the Bible actually says about birth, and we'll have episodes about that, and what you get to receive through Jesus because he died for you, and along with mindset tips and practical advice, such as, certain positions you can use during birth and how to advocate for yourself if needed. And so I cannot wait to share these things with you, and I am so honored to be part of your journey. And so please leave a review of the show. It's going to help other moms find this, like me, who needed this. People just don't know about this. You don't know what you don't know. And so helping to leave a review gets more eyes on this and helps more people to find it. Or you can visit my website at sierracooke.com, where there's more resources, some courses that I'm going to put out, and you can connect with me directly there. And so I'm so grateful that you were here, and we'll talk again soon.